Hello, everyone. This is June 7th, 2022. It's a meeting of the Medfield Board of Water and Sewerage, taking place remotely as well as in person here. We have a lot of agenda items and a couple of them are kind of thick. And there's one item that is on the agenda, but it's related. The first, I'll call the meeting to order. First item is to go over the outstanding meeting minutes from the previous meeting, which was actually the 13th of April. The meeting minutes were not compiled. One of us will have to go through the Zoom meeting and
I wasn't here.
I know. Yeah, I mean, that's what I had to do last night when that happened. So you and I will figure out who has the time to do it. But the actual open items from the last meeting that I captured. First of all, there were none that were open. There were no carry forwards. And in the meeting itself, 2 items. Eric, Kelly, a VPG, or is it just environmental partners? Because they're not part of it. Environmental partners. I'm going to send us a link to the PFAS portal, the state of Massachusetts, which he has done. He sent that around. The other was a suggestion to Maurice to look at sampling, creating duplicate samples, and also because we want to make sure that we have a sampling date. If there's a problem with one, that there's more than one sample, and also to create a standard procedure for a chain of custody for when they take a sample, where it goes and how it gets secured, how it gets sent out there. So that one I think is still open. Maurice isn't here to speak for his progress on it. Which also I didn't mention earlier, that it's hard enough to get this meeting together here. I had to choose between having enough board members, and Maurice and I decided, well, we just couldn't miss another meeting. Oh, there's Dave. Dave's coming in. Welcome, Dave.
Yeah, I finally got connected through, so here I am.
Okay, that's okay. Just for your background, we don't have the minutes from the previous meeting, which was 13th of April. We just had 2 open action items. One is closed out. Eric sent the PFAS. There's a website for the Mass DEP for PFAS. And the second was Maurice was going to look at creating duplicate samples and storage of those duplicate samples in a chain of custody standard operating procedure, so that we know what the process is for these important samples. So, do you have any other items that came from that meeting? Absolutely. I'm going to table item number 1, number 2. There are none. There are no holdover actions. I'm sorry. There are new actions that are. There are no holdovers, and there are 2 new. The first one is closed. The second one is open. Okay, so getting down to item number 3.
Well,
6.
sorry, Bill.
Yeah.
I do have one thing.
Yeah.
From my notes from last month, is Environmental Partners was going to update the memo on fluoride treatment systems, and then we were just gonna make a few tweaks. We're gonna post it, be able to kind of close that one out for now.
Okay.
Did you see? I don't remember seeing any updated memo So I think that's something to carry over for.
Okay, okay, good catch.
I don't want to forget that.
Yep. So we'll post that to the website too. Yes, there's so much interest in it. Okay. Okay, next item is well 6 maintenance update. So since we've met, we all know that we lost the operation of well number 6. Some parts and pieces failed, and they have been they've been ordered. They were shipped about a week and a half ago. I asked Maurice to get the tracker for shipment of that. I haven't heard from him on that. Even if it's a distributor, they should know with the if it's a LTL, less than trailer load, should be able to get a link since we're the ultimate receiver of it. But the installer is waiting for it. So if I was a betting man, probably this week is probably when it will arrive. If I had to guess, LTL shipments don't take that long. It's California. So as a result of that, we did have to go to Tier 4 water restriction since the last meeting, which means primarily the rule is hand only watering, so no irrigation systems to be used in the town during this. Also operationally, one of the pumps at well number well number 2, right, needs to have its impeller replaced, and we're operating on the back of that. So that well is operational, but it just right when we needed it to work harder, it's challenged a little bit. So we're redeveloping it and putting in the filtration system for 3 and 4, and unfortunately, well 6 failed, before we got that up and running. So part of the justification for having 3 and 4, the 3 and 4 project, was to serve as a large backup to 6, because 6 is our largest production well. Unfortunately, the parts of that failed before we can get our filter plant constructed, which is due to come online February or March of next year. So it's just unfortunate thing. You can't have spare parts for everything. Look at our entire water system. There are a lot of things that could be a single point of failure, whether it's a tank or some difficult to replace valve, or you just can't have multiples of everything. So as part of that, we are still in a Tier 4 water restriction, and when we get this pump replaced, based on the stream flows and our permits, we might have the ability, depending upon what the stream flow is, we might be able to go to 1-day watering once the pump is replaced. But there really is, we really can't do much better than that, because, excuse me, where's my phone? Because the DEP declared a mild 1 drought in this region, which triggers in our permit the most water that we could pump, so to speak, is the 1 day per week under those restrictions. So even if we can bring everything up online tomorrow, that is the best that we can do based on the DEP declaration. So this sort of inspired me to maybe sit down with Mo and create a decision tree that is part of how, what are our matrix of opportunities and how we operate, during different tiers, so that we could have a single piece of paper so they know if we are here, what are our abilities? Because basically trying to create a visual, pull it out of the permits that we have and the situation, so we know where we are, because we're always doing a lot of explaining about it. But I think if it can create a visual for that, it can help us navigate, and also we can put it on the town website, so at least they know where we are, what situation. It will sort of speak for itself. As part of the work on the maintenance for well 6, as well as some items that need to be replaced at the wastewater plant, Mo has requested the town to approve, the board to approve the use of the category of emergency, the emergency category that is we have both a line item for both the water and the sewerage budgets. And that seems to be, that's why we have this category in there for something like this. So I wanted to put that on the table for the fellow board members to talk about.
Clarification I thought is that you don't need it yet, but in case we need it, you'd like us to authorize the use of those funds. If there's more emergency, so that we have to call special meeting. Is that correct? Or are we already needing to use the money?
What you described is how I understood his request. He wants to have the ability to tap it, but he's not sure if he's got enough budget yet.
Yeah, no, that's the way I read it. And the fact that he's gonna need it before we're gonna be able to meet again, most likely. And here we are in June, and it was hard to get us together here in June. July and August always tend to be a little more challenging. So no, we have this category. It's not a large part of the budget. It's less than 0.5% of the operating budget on sewerage, and it's like a quarter of the operating budget of water. So it's not a large, really large line item, and it's not. This isn't really discretionary spend. This is it's a pretty important spend. Yeah.
Well, I'll make a motion that we authorize the use of the emergency reserve funds for both water and sewer as needed at Mo's discretion.
I'll second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And Dave, since you're remotely, can you say your
And I don't have official vote responsibility, but I endorse the,
right.
yeah, I endorse the approval.
I forget.
Especially Christine's in the back, she's checking out on me, so.
Those are 50,000 each, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Anything else on that? So we've gotten through 3, 4. Okay, 5, discussion of PFAS sampling results. Just for everyone's memory, we are the way they look at your results of PFAS. They look at the average of a calendar month. I'm sorry, a calendar quarter. And since we started a new quarter for April and May, our data looks very good. So for April, so the wells 1 and 2 are the ones that we are really looking at, because everything else is either not applicable or not detect. So for the combination of wells number 1 and 2, which are treated essentially as one source per the DEP because of where they're located and how they're interconnected and how they're operated. The results for 17.6 and 18.6. So neither one of them are above the 20 threshold, and so obviously the average of the two of those for the current quarter are below 20. So I feel pretty good about that. Any other remarks, commentary from fellow board members?
No, encouraging, staying kind of in the same range, so. It's good.
Bill, I have a couple of questions about the monitoring as it goes on. If they had exceeded the 20 ppm level in the last quarter, do you have to do it over so many quarters before action's required? Is that listed somewhere in a document that I should be looking at, or I'm trying to understand the magnitude
It won't be
of how
listed in the
dire it is.
document you're looking at.
Right.
If you're looking at results, it's not there.
Right.
Connect you with the DEP guidance on it though.
As far as action, when the DEP wants us to consider actions, when we have samples where the average is above 20 for a calendar quarter.
Okay.
And it's not a rolling average. So you start in on the new quarter. So they had some reason for that, but that's how they do that.
Okay.
Next item, board review the PFAS treatment study by environmental partners. Okay, so environmental partners put together a study. We asked them to, this was a study so that we can understand if treating for PFAS in the town was required, what would that look like? So let's recall that our wells are in different parts of the town. They're also in different water basins, and so they also have different environmental influences. And it's also been my experience that something like this tends to be a point source constituent that you would treat for. You don't treat the whole town's water for that. Very difficult to do because our water sources are in many different places. So EPG together this study. They looked at the existing wells, infrastructure, also keeping an eye, I'm sure, on the data that's come in as they prepared this report. And so this had actually they did have data all the way through January or February, and they presented some conceptual designs if the different water sources needed to have treatment done, and some of the nitty-gritty of how these treatment systems operate and what sort of infrastructure or improvements or infrastructure that we need to put in place to do that. So that's my summary of what was delivered. Any questions or commentary from the board here?
I think it's useful to know. I think the point right now is we would be waiting for any changes in Mass DEP, or well, I guess EPA's regulation changes that would trigger Mass DEP to change regulation that would trigger us a need to treat. Is that like really what we're
No.
laying out the plan? That's not where we're laying out the plan for what would happen if something more stringent comes along.
The US EPA doesn't have to make any changes in order for the Massachusetts DEP to enforce their limit of 20.
Oh, I thought there was potential for PFAS regulation federal level.
That's
Coming
true.
down in this fall.
That's
So
true.
I
There
don't know if
is,
we're, like,
and
looking
that's
forward to
true.
that, or,
It seems unlikely that it will be more stringent than
Okay.
Massachusetts, but if it was, then what you're describing probably comes true. Then
That's
Mass DEP has to come down to at least meet the Fed, yeah.
I mean, if the federal government doesn't have a maximum contaminant limit for manganese, but the state does.
Right.
So this it tends to happen that some states have more stringent regulations than the US EPA. So, PFAS itself being, it is, there are hundreds or thousands of these compounds, and the causality of what specific compounds are and how they're linked to different health effects. There's a huge body of work that people are working on. And because it is so, what I would say, non-singular for something like the size of the US EPA, it's taking them a while to get their arms around something like this. So this Massachusetts has chosen 6 specific PFAS compounds, and as an aggregate, racks and stacks and puts them in a pile and says a limit on the pile of those 6 is 20 ppb. So that's how we go out and get the data that we sample, and the data comes up to us as individual PFAS components, and then there's some of those that create the individual specific number that's in there. So, my only commentary is that, since we've had about a year of data, to me, it's obvious it's well 1 and well 2 that, we need to keep our eyes on. And those sites, they have maybe some of their own site challenges, but they don't seem to be really insurmountable. It's also good that our new water treatment filtration system with 3 and 4 is, there really isn't hardly any data, I think, other than maybe a sampling error from over a year ago. It's been not detected ever since.
Yeah.
So in summary, the $11-12 million that we're putting into that facility, we would not have to add additional treatment to that, although we've put in the blind flanges in case we do need to connect for something, either PFAS or something else in the future. We don't have to worry about that. So it's great that the filtration project we have going on there is just going to proceed in its fashion. No change orders in design, no change orders in materials or anything else expected of that. And the treatment technologies that are here on Exchange and granular activated carbon have been around since all of us. So, the ion exchange has been around since the 1930s. The particular ion exchange resin material, there are ones that are becoming more narrowly scoped to just deal with PFAS, but these are pretty basic technology. So it isn't going to take a lot to establish the efficacy of the treatment that is picked. If we ever had to do that, and is not really a mystery of how to get rid of PFAS.
I had some commentary around the draft report that I haven't circulated back to environmental partners, but I can. We don't have representation here, so I don't know if there's a lot of value.
Sorry, Eric is on the
Eric's
call.
online.
Okay, and would it be worthwhile to discuss a few of my questions, or should I just send it to Eric?
No, good. Go ahead.
I
Fire
don't
'em
take
up.
more time than we
You
have.
can promote Eric maybe into this.
Afternoon.
Hey, Eric.
Hi, Eric.
Thanks for joining.
Christian, let me just, so what I had on my plate for comments received to date, we had some discussion about a month ago where you had commented just on kind of expanding upon the differences between the media types, just in terms of how they compare against each other, their potential effectiveness, O&M considerations, things of that sort, to expand on the discussion there. Claire, you had pointed out something in an email that I've just kept off to the side, waiting to collect more information so we can address that. And then there had been, since we issued this, I guess it's coming up on about 4 months. We obviously can update to reflect the data that's been received over that time frame, so that it's as current as the data is, and just provide some explanation of some of those regulatory topics that kind of came up. I guess it would have been with the April meeting when we were talking about quarterly averages and how the compliance is held over the calendar quarter, not running quarter, just so that that's clearly explained. That's the current regulatory compliance dynamic we're in. So that's what I had on my two. The only other piece that is not in front of you in the study you have is we have our electrical engineers supplement that was looking at things related to adaptability of all the existing systems to accept additional electrical loads, but also things of, if you were to implement anything at any of the stations, what other electrical supporting devices might be due for rehabilitation due to useful life. So we are going to incorporate that as an attachment. So it goes with the document. And we're also going to reflect that since we issued the draft, well 6's pump and motor will have failed and will be replaced. So that was one of the recommendations that was going to be coming out of, if anything were ever to happen with 6, you would need a pump and motor upgrade just to deal with the additional head loss you'd have. So we'll at least wasn't in the planned upgrade as we were kind of conceptualizing, but we'll at least reconcile that has happened so that it's the report's current for those things.
Thanks, Eric. I have a couple of other things on here that you didn't mention. I want to make sure that they're addressed in the report, even if you've already considered them. One is any discussion around the wastewater treatment plant and its ability to handle the backwash.
It's an ongoing topic of concern across many places.
Somewhere else, right? So.
But the intention, the PFAS would be absorbed into the media. It's just that there'll be regulations around the backwashing to fluff the bed so you don't get channeling, right, Eric? That's really what this is, right? Yeah, well, so there's two elements. Not one relevant to say wells 1 and 2, which would be the potential for some carryover of particulate that could foul the media, whether it's carbon or ion exchange, and how would you deal with that? So if it's a maintenance wash, as we call it, it's not backwashing like what's going to happen at wells 3 and 4. It's just a periodic maintenance wash just to fluff the bed and, kind of push along any fines that have kind of accumulated at the head of the filter or the contactor. So that might be, some systems are doing that, monthly, semi-annual. It kind of varies by water system, depending on what their issue of concern is. So it would be that infrequent maintenance wash, which would be most likely in the case of wells 1 and 2, probably some iron and manganese related particles. So it wouldn't really be the media itself. It would be whatever has come out of solution and sat on it. The water, in theory, would be on the clean side of the PFAS contactor. So the water itself should be relatively PFAS free in a maintenance wash. Anything that might be on the residual, if there's any carryover, you'd see some minor amounts. So I don't see it as a huge concern in this instance, because you'd be rinsing with treated water, which would be ideal so that you can kind of minimize that PFAS in your residuals going to the wastewater plant. I mean, the other benefit to the wastewater plant is that on a mass load scale, if you're treating wells 1 and 2, the amount of PFAS that's actually headed to them from water produced at wells 1 and 2 is significantly going to be reduced because of the treatment. So if you looked at it from a mass balance, they might see some things from, residential commercial use, but anything that is present in water produced at wells 1 and 2 would be PFAS treated. So overall, you'd see technically a load reduction. But let me ask a maybe related question. Is there a burden on the wastewater treatment plant to remove PFAS to a level so it
Not yet.
discharge. Okay.
So that is contingent on, so the federal.
I mean, a majority of it is going to be absorbed in the media, but you're talking about larger
Yeah,
parts.
I'm talking about impurities that would sit on top of the filtration, the treatment media that you're just trying to remove so that it's not causing any head loss buildup at the top of the filter. And if certain medias can withstand that maintenance wash and other ones cannot. So it also comes down to media selection. So yeah, certain IX
This is only
medias.
done excuse me, but this is only done every month or every 2 months.
Yeah,
like
it'd kind of be
this.
one of those things you'd either see it during your pilot phase and decide what you think the starting is, or as you gain experience operating the system, you might find like, all right, we need to do it every quarter just to, fluff the contactor to just kind of remove anything that could be carrying over. So it's an unknown, but as far as on the wastewater receiving end, the expectation is that through the NIPTES program, a lot of wastewater plants are just waiting to find out what they're going to have to be doing for influent screening and effluent monitoring. So think of it as more like if you're removing it from one of your dominant sources, then they're really seeking where else is it coming at from their collection system. If it's residential, sanitary waste, like commercial, industrial, something in your pre-treatment program, and then ultimately to drive that, they need a surface water quality standard that says X amount of PFAS is allowed into the river, and that doesn't exist yet.
Right.
So once
and
that happens,
ultimately, right, if we have to capture the backwash water from a PFAS treatment system, that would go into a 10,000 gallon FRP tank. We would let it settle, and then we would basically filter the backwash water after the sediment is filtered. So it doesn't turn into a major process change. We would just have to do something like that.
You just have to figure out how do you build your like little EQ tank to hang on to it and then let that settle, and then you could have a pump that would then pump it to the head of the system, and you'd kind of be as close to zero liquid discharge as you get if you had to. That's what some facilities are trying to do, but there's other entities who are extremely challenged on this, because if you have I would say if it's not your municipally owned treatment works and it's a regional, or in the case of a very large regional treatment system, they might tell you your discharges shall meet drinking water standards. And that could be very challenging for residuals waste streams, because they're not really meant to be analyzed as drinking water. They're not potable, but they're being held to the only standard that exists right now, which is the drinking water standards. So it's an evolving issue on the residual side, but there's ways to work with it, I guess you could say.
I've got two more that are probably relatively straightforward. One is, and this is not one where I think we need to spend a lot of time, because I don't think well 6 is determined to be a problem. But one of the questions that came up for me when I was reading through the options for well 6 was space constraints seem to be a bigger deal there. So is it possible to actually use a downstream site, given that there are so few users at that end of the system? And that didn't seem to have been sort of considered as an option. So around siting, that was one of the things that came to mind was, is there a downstream site that we could use? Maybe there's even a little bit of a repiping configuration to make that work. But again, I don't think well 6 is where
That's a good point. We bring it farther downstream and then extend the service area in the other direction for the few customers that are along that route. I mean,
just because there's a lease site with constrained options, so it just seemed like there might be
what's our only other customer? The transfer station.
Probably.
So when it comes to well 6, the siting constraint isn't so much the existing space can better accommodate a treatment facility floor plan than at wells 1 and 2. The challenge really is you don't technically own the land. So is it more of a legal land use lease with the state issue than a physical footprint? Technically, by footprint, you have plenty of space at well 6 to put something there exterior to the existing chemical treatment building. It really just comes down to how much latitude did the state give the town when that agreement was put in place. Like technically you have a nice easement boundary. So in theory, are you allowed to do anything you want in your own sandbox that you leased? That's for a lawyer to determine. But in that question of downstream treatment,
If there's some lawyers out there, some of the way.
Lawyers available. Yeah.
How do we get this?
Yeah, that's a fair point. And that's what I was considering, was just the fact that we may be constrained on options to use the land available.
no, and I think from the documents we pulled together from Mark and the state, it's kind of obviously it wasn't written within the idea that you would have a future upgrade or need, but so it's a question mark. But it is something relevant to wells 1 and 2 because the available footprint there is extremely limited. There is research ongoing now, even including in Massachusetts at some pilot level of some medias that are chlorine tolerant so that they could actually be on the finished water side of the treatment system. So like basically you pump through it after you've done all of your other stuff, as opposed to being an intermediate step. If that develops further, then you could have a remote station where you're actually treating out in the system as opposed to being, so if you have to go down the road from wells 1 and 2 and you could just put that vessel there and you're just plumbing through it instead of trying to do it on your limited footprint, that is one thing that's going on. There's a couple pilots in discussion right now with a particular technology vendor that shows some real promise, just because one of the biggest limitations on these medias for groundwater sources is the need to pre-treat your water. So in the case of like wells 3 and 4, we're removing iron and manganese. PFAS contactor and medias do not like iron and manganese in the water. They foul, they create bacterial issues. So you see a lot of concern about that. This newer media doesn't care about iron and manganese. It doesn't care about chlorine. It actually can handle higher flows, higher loading rates than traditional media. So it almost seems too good to be true is what we're kind of like, we're waiting to see it prove out. Like it's been done in the lab and at other waste sites and wastewater plants. They've shown it's effective with, much higher concentrations than what most communities test. But
there's two, one's a question, one's a statement. The question is, why would this be allowed? Because this just sounds like you're putting water that needs to be treated into infrastructure. Then we have to figure out the correct place or places in order to treat it in the main line. And that seems to be, that would be contrary to what the DEP would want.
Just to clarify. Yeah, I'm saying between your first customer and your pump, not like out in some random street and you're pulling treated water, like finished water. It just gives you the flexibility to move your treatment to the end of your treatment system instead of it being intermediary, which is a big deal, especially at a site like 1 and 2 where there's no real footprint to do much of anything. If you had a piece of land that was between your first customer and your pump, you could then put your treatment there because you've already got your disinfection, you've got your pH adjustment all taken care of. So
okay. The other is I'm very skeptical about the requirement that it's a burden for chlorine. Removing chlorine prior to PFAS is difficult. It's very easy.
No, it's not a question of difficulty. It's just that it's another thing you have to have. So
yeah, but just
the process is not. It's just footprint needs. We're going through it in a couple places now, and it's just additional things that create pressure loss, additional things you have to operate and maintain, and
yeah, but it's just I'll talk
the
to
process
you
itself.
about it.
It's the process of dechlorinating is not an issue. It's just more like you have to dedicate more resources to it.
It's not a big deal. We can talk offline.
So space constraints, Christian, and then
oh yeah,
one more.
he's got one.
I got one more, sorry. If the state or the federal government changes the requirements, they move the goalposts on us, just sort of a commentary discussing how difficult it is to I don't know if reconfigure is the right word. It's not necessarily a question of adding media all the time. It might be a question of changing the way it's used. I don't know if it's either different PFAS constituents that we have to start managing, or the levels go down. Like, just how hard is it to do that?
So I
Without
think
knowing where the goalposts would be, obviously.
so. The level of uncertainty will get a little clearer in the next 6 months with the. It's anticipated EPA will issue a draft MCL for 2 of the 6 compounds that Massachusetts regulates. How they set those levels is then going to cascade to determine whether that rationale gets carried to other compounds, and does DEP, which is scheduled to revisit the MCL in 2023, does that mean that they have to rethink, is PFAS 6 20 parts per trillion the right standard, or does it need to get reduced? Do they add compounds? Do they have individual MCLs plus the group MCL? That's where we don't know, because once EPA acts, it will kind of, the dominoes will start falling. And yes, it's only 2 of 6, but I think that's where people are concerned. So I think right now, with that level of uncertainty, the question is, does it not necessarily change your treatment process, but it might change your operational and maintenance requirements, which means if you figured you were only changing your media out, say, every 16 months, there might be a compound that breaks through sooner, and that's the decision for why you would have to do a media change out. So maybe you're replacing media more frequently, or you might have to do more time on treatability because each media shows a little bit of preference for certain compounds more than others. So there might be some of that compound specific selection that has to be taken into account. But for the systems that are up and operating now, I think that's where some concern is with those water systems, is what does the new regulatory framework going to do to the systems they've invested in over the last 5 years?
Yeah, it might even be the contrary, where if the US EPA says that the limit on one of the compounds is by itself is 25 and another one is 20, then you could say, well, should Massachusetts have a limit of 20 when the sum of the EPA is already over 45? You can see how well, you can see how the sum of these could be something completely different, and the activation level for some towns, it might be below a new limit, so that they might even bypass it.
I think the expectation is that EPA's decision set off of rethinking how they establish the 20. That might mean that my guess is it will either stay the same, or it will definitely change in being more conservative. I don't see them changing it in the opposite, because they would have anti-backsetting. But I think with their ability now to hit a year plus of all the systems greater than 3,300 customers testing. So I think they have a whole backlog of data to look at to say compound unrelated components, how do they play in? So I think the picture is going to just keep getting, whether it's more compounds, changing levels. I think all things are kind of up in the air, but DEP was scheduled next year to revisit the MCL no matter what EPA was up to. I just think that obviously will weigh in pretty heavily in how they act here.
And I think that's what I was going with the beginning, just saying in terms of the regulatory change, we're not looking to take an action today. Is this more information for our back pocket? Should we need either the regulation to change or the system to be over the limit?
Yes, this is for us to be prepared to understand,
Right.
the general assessment, right?
I would say, and there's a lot of communities who haven't experienced the level of stability in the PFAS 6 results that Wells 1 and 2 have seen. They've seen a roller coaster. They've been in exceedance beyond the MCL for months, and then all of a sudden they're under the MCL, and they're making decisions based on the prior exceedance because the expectation is they might be very seasonally influenced. For some, very fortunate case, Wells 1 and 2 seem to like standing basically between 16 and 19, and that's where It's just something to do with the hydrogeology, and whatever source is
Yeah.
impacting it just seems very stable, which is a
Yeah, well,
fortunate occurrence.
Yeah, to that point, it sort of buttresses the argument that wells 1 and 2 are not under the influence as from a surface water source. In addition to other geologies, just, they are right near the river, so.
Yeah. I mean, you
So
can't.
that's what's really interesting about the data.
Yeah, I think if you were to, before you started screening monthly, I think the expectation would be you would be seeing more of an influence of whatever is going on in the Charles would be imparted into your wells. So it's fortunate they're not. It's also, nice that wells 6 and 3 and 4 are so low that you're not quite boxed in. Some communities have the opposite. Their high producing well is the dominant source of PFAS, and their lower quality small wells unfortunately are not, have little to none. So
That's right.
it's very good for preparedness, but you do have, the ability to make, more decisions as to how you want to proceed and see how the regulatory environment evolves in the next 6 months.
This is an action. Are we really going to try to talk to, figure out legally whether we could add to using the easement at well 6, or was that just a hypothetical question?
No, it's one of the many things we need
I don't think
to.
we're taking action on
Okay,
it.
that's what I just want. Yeah, just want to make sure what you're saying.
But I have it on the list to
Check it out.
Okay. So Eric, do you have some feedback to enhance this report?
Yep. Yeah. So my goal was to collect everything from you all, and then we'll turn it around. So by the end of the month, you have we'll call it the draft final. That incorporates our electrical engineers' assessment of the electrical components, and then the feedback we received to date. And then we can discuss again at the July meeting if you feel like it, and we'll just wait for direction from you all.
Yeah, and Eric, I had a few technical questions I can send you via
Okay.
email, I guess.
Yeah, that's fine.
The
Yeah,
sizing of the beds and difference between raw water and aerated water and finished water, that type of stuff. I was just concerned about the size of the treatment beds themselves being 20, 25 feet tall. And
they are not insignificant.
not small, right? I did have a question I'd ask, just so everybody hears the same question. You were talking about the need to either beef up or replace the pumps to overcome this 10-pound pressure drop through the bed. I was wondering if there's any flexibility on that 10 pounds. Can you, set that at 5-pound delta P and then,
No, it's
fluff the
really
bed into that, or is 10 pounds really what you need to
that's
design
the
it for?
prototypical 10 to 15 pounds. One of the bigger drivers is actually the IX systems have requirements for basically larger diameter particle sediment strainers ahead upstream of them. That's one of the things that protects the IX media. That device is usually one of the biggest drivers for the head loss.
Okay.
So with GAC, you're not as concerned about it, but IX, that just seems. But even on a GAC system, you assume you're gonna have enough minor losses through all the piping, through the vessel itself, the accumulation of some head loss through the filter media at some point. So you just plan for that, which in the case of the pumps at say wells 1 and 2, it all depends. You might not need to change anything hydraulically if you're intermediate, because those pumps come from the well and go into a tank right there on site. If it's on the finished water side and you're trying to fill your storage tanks, that additional 10 PSI, 15 PSI could really, reduce the effective capacity of that pump. So you just would. We took that into account with wells 3 and 4. All the pumps, the 2 new pumps that will be put there, have enough range that if we put a system in place there, it would pump through it and you'd still get the same capacity. It doesn't care.
Sure.
But those stage 6, 1 and 2 being older, they obviously didn't have that kind of range built into their basis of design, when they got installed years ago.
Great.
We okay on this side?
Keep rolling here.
Keep rolling. All right. Okay. So the action item is actually, Eric, you're in about a month.
Yeah, by the end of the month, we'll have it right back in your hands.
Okay, end of the month. Fantastic. Okay, item number 7, board review the hospital development conceptual design by Trinity/VHB and review the peer review by memorandum by environmental partners. Okay, I'd like to recognize members from the hospital development committee. Okay, just want to make sure I get it, get it right. So the timeline is that this issue is going to be in front of the town at the annual town meeting.
No, special town meeting.
Special town meeting on
June 21st.
June 21st. Okay, and that's the only agenda item at that meeting.
Correct.
I'm happy to provide a little context of that.
Let me just get through some admin stuff here. So we were sent this package recently for my new relative new board members benefit. We visited this about 3 years ago when there was conceptual design, and from the board's perspective, we were presented with some general water demand and for what would be used for the conceptual designs that are up in the hospital hill. And we deliberated on items such as the amount of water as an average, what the peak water uses would be. We also looked at the incremental load to the wastewater treatment system for the additional demand of water and the use of the water and the subsequent sewerage that would come from the treatment for that. And also the recognition that there will be interconnection that would need to be studied and to be verified that the existing infrastructure either be able to be easily integrated, or there might be some additional costs to connect both on the water and the wastewater side to the development up on the hill. And that was sort of the last time we discussed that. Is that your sort of general recollection?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's where we are. So now we do have a developer, we do have a design, and we have design of what's been proposed to be up there. And also what was sent to us was a description of what the project would entail in general, and also some discussion on the water and wastewater. What were your thoughts on reading both this report as well as the peer review by environmental partners?
For me, nothing jumped out as a concern. I mean, what I got out of the review from environmental partners was generally aligned with expectations around typical statistics and approaches. And I think the environmental partners memo came up with a few reasonable questions to chase down, but nothing that struck me as potential roadblocks or problems that are going to be difficult to overcome.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have the same takeaways that there are a number of action items, or not action items, but considerations. But I guess in the process, where do we do that? When do we go look for the? When do they say you should do this? You should look at this. And what is the process we're going to take to get those answers?
Yeah, I don't. I think I share maybe both of your comments. I didn't see any large changes in demand or the profile for what's being put up there. Actually, there's less water demand. I think that there probably was a gap in what type of landscaping they're going to do, what they plan to do up there. That would most likely, whether it's as an average or especially as a peak, probably exceed, the domestic water consumption, depending on what they decide to plant up there. So that hasn't been taken into account. But I think that the amount, the lower amount that's in this current design is probably will offset what they need to use for landscaping, but I'm not sure. I know there was a concern about whether the existing sewerage interceptor was gonna be able to handle this, but I think that most of that was probably, I think that was addressed in environmental partners discussion about both the peak load as well as how the load would be handled on the sewer side of things. But I didn't see anything that was unusual or contrary or perpendicular to subject matter that we covered in years past.
Yeah, I agree. I think the landscaping use is a good point. I don't know if that's been discussed.
I
very
just want
much.
to, on that piece, in particular, we have language in the land disposition agreement that we're working on, but it's not final. That does prohibit the use of water for irrigation currently, because the VHP proposal focused on household use. So that's.
I mean, we
language
wouldn't
that's in
mind
there.
it. We wouldn't
Well,
mind
that's, I
having a
think-
customer,
That's
right?
yes,
No, I mean,
yeah.
if we have the water
Sure.
and it's part of the town, for it to be designed
Sure.
to pave the place and have tumbleweeds doesn't make any sense, right? If there needs to be some sort of balance with that.
Would if we insert a language that said at the approval of the Board of Water and Sewerage, and so it's an item that can be reviewed as this progresses in future, rather than an outright
Yeah,
prohibition or an
we
outright
love
allowance.
customers. We
Okay.
love
That's
I
customers.
think I think it's hard for us to say yes to that right now, when we haven't seen any of their analysis of what they are doing for landscape.
Sure.
Yeah,
That was
sure.
our concern.
Customers notwithstanding.
Right.
I think minimizing usage for irrigation purposes just makes sense. I mean, if we want to continue, the town's going to continue to grow, these are probably not the last homes to be built here.
Right.
I think I'd hate to commit precious resource to landscaping and irrigation use when other design features can be used instead.
Yeah, and when you look at the metrics that are in our annual summary report, our ASR report, development that is in existing places or dense development will help us in per capita use anyhow.
Yep.
Just, higher density will reduce our per capita use because as an aggregate, they're using, less water, there's less person per acreage right now. So, what do you need from us?
Can we ask?
I mean, if I may, so.
What do you
just-
need from us?
Yeah, so from the development committee standpoint, so the development committee was formed in 2018, right after the master plan was released. And as the name implies, we were focused on, trying to work with the vision in the master plan and see if it were viable and it could be brought to fruition. Water was identified pretty early on as a possible issue, to the point where we had worked with Par Corporation to do a study in September of 2019 that was then reviewed by environmental partners, which I believe was issued to the Department of Water and Sewerage rather than Development Committee. And both of those seem to say, subject to the assumptions in the report, this seems like there's sufficient capacity. We then move forward to an RFP stage. And through that process, the selectmen designated Trinity Financial. They're not relying on these other studies. They commission their own through VHB. They've made that available to us. We've had a peer review done by environmental partners. And as we're moving to special town meeting, I think we're just trying to ensure that to the layperson, it seems like these 4 reports all say, the situation is manageable. We want to make sure we're answering any questions that you all have, right, prior to town meeting. We're not trying to permit the project now, right? The vote at town meeting is to whether the selectmen are authorized to move forward to sell the land to Trinity, subject to a disposition agreement. And that disposition agreement would incorporate the standard permitting process. So 18 months, maybe, post-town meeting, to get through not just permitting review, but with, you know, all the other departments and committees before the land actually would transfer. So I think we're just trying to ensure people have been able to review the materials. I know we've got a lot of people on the call that are associated with the VHB report, if anybody wants to talk those details. Yeah, I will say, when we have the public meetings, there are a lot of concerns about water. I mean, we're hearing, you know, urban, oh, 1961, this happened over on Indian Hill. It's hard to really respond to that, other than to
We
say.
don't respond to something 50 years ago.
Okay.
We'll release you from that.
Okay. But I do think there is some confusion. So people will say, and I'm sure you get this all the time, okay, I'm handheld watering now, it's early June. What's gonna
That's a
happen?
different-
What's gonna
yeah.
happen when you build something up that?
That's not really, you don't feel like you have to be compelled to answer that.
We are though, because we're the ones. at
No, but
meeting,
the
so-
board, I mean, we,
Right,
this,
but,
right, as an aggregate, this is gonna add,
The town has to be able
So I
3
guess
or
that's the bottom
4%.
line, is that what we're looking for, is you to start answering those questions.
right. Oh, there it is. There's the.
I have another meeting, so let's.
Okay, right.
I think we
Right.
need your support and you to start answering those questions, to say, we've done these studies, the studies that Trinity has done confirmed your initial EPG studies back in 2018, 2019, and then we've had a peer review that's confirmed that even further, less demand. And I think one of the things we've learned is that we need an educational campaign about why we have handheld watering and why we have water bans. It's not because we have a lack of capacity or we don't have that water, it's because we're being dictated by the state as to, you know, drought
Yeah, and
levels.
that's part of that
Yeah.
like logic diagram. Like if
Exactly.
you're here, then this is your situation.
Right.
If you're here, and we're not dissimilar from a lot of other towns that have permits,
Mhm.
that have special you know, considerations or decision points within their permit. So
Yep.
so that's every, but you know, as an aggregate, this is adding what, less than 3% additional incremental water, and that's not a very large water demand. I mean, sans, you know, excluding the landscaping question, because they could have double or triple the domestic water use in certain situations, and I think that would have to be like part of maybe the constraints, you know, of the development. So I think we'd have to have some sort of voice to create a specification of something like that, which from there would drive, you know, design standards or planting standards or water use standards or, you know, collection on site standards, or however we wanted to sort of to look at it. But
That would be part of your
it's not a
normal
lot of,
process,
yeah.
right, when the development is proposed. So nobody's proposing any change to that.
You know, if you look at the number of beds that have been beds, so to speak, that are thinking to be added up there, and you consider the larger projects in the last 5 years through 40B and others, it's about the same, really, as far as the number of people, bedrooms, however you want to sort of look at it, at that one particular site, and you sum up the last 5 years, it's about the same amount of people. So the difference here is that this is maybe a little bit more dense, and it's got more history to it, but we've brought down our water use and stopped the leaks at a much higher rate, and which will more than make up for, you know, a % or 2 incremental demand. That's my opinion.
Yeah, Bill, I was going to comment on that too. In the report from Environmental Partners, they make that distinction that, you know, the town has to continue with their I&I initiatives to reduce, you know, unaccounted for water, and town should continue to evaluate the water conservation measures and that type of stuff. So I didn't know if that was put in there because there was a concern that there is some idea that the water usage will creep, or if it was just put in there to, you know, be good, you know, continue to do the good things you're doing.
Yeah.
Right. I was gonna ask that we ask our expert, who happens to be on the line here.
Right.
If we're interpreting his memo correctly.
Who is there?
Yeah. I don't have anyone to look behind to, so. No, I think I think the general feeling was that the Trinity proposal is in line with where PAR's, kind of estimates from the master reuse plan that's now, probably about 3 years old. It's in line with that. I think the reason for incorporating things looking at annual usage and the wastewater plant's average and peak days, just to try and give a scale to what this one project demand is going to be. So it's not, distributed development throughout town aggregating up to this. It's one project that you'll realize it probably on a quicker turnaround. What impact does that have compared to what the town is already doing? Like Bill mentioned, unaccounted for water has been brought under control in the last 5 years. The II work is ongoing, so that's addressing a similar, challenge on that side. So you're creating float in your permits to say that we can support, future development, maintain your existing goals, and can support these kind of things, so that you're not against a hard ceiling, because negotiating those permit changes is extremely onerous. So you're following best practices. This project can fit within the constraints you have now, and ultimately the work the town's doing is probably going towards offsetting any demands of this scale from this project, which clears space for, future development, whether it's 5 years, 10, who knows. But the project seems that it can work within the existing systems. There's no major hurdles on the existing water or wastewater infrastructure as far as concerns with that front. The irrigation thing's just worth bringing up, because obviously it can be, it hasn't been thought of yet, because that type of design is pretty detailed as to where, obviously the site right now is unirrigated, and there's probably portions that are great during the summer, and other places that turn into burnt out hay fields just because they get a lot of exposure and you get just drier season. So I think we just wanted to call attention to the limited amount of stormwater due diligence based on the available data. Says there's going to be a closed system up there that could really present some great opportunities to try and figure out how to creatively reuse, stormwater down the road, which might be the innovation you need to kind of not rely on a potable system for any irrigation uses, whether that gets written in or it just gets developed at a later date as the design package becomes more clear. This is all done at the 20,000 foot level of number of bedrooms, a skeleton network of infrastructure. Like, the fine details will color in where those things really are. And as they design the facilities themselves, they're obviously probably going to be using code compliant, very efficient fixtures and everything that aren't necessarily present throughout the rest of town. So, there is that. There are some other unquantified benefits likely from something like this, in terms of, will the residential per capita use of a resident up at the hospital development be the same as someone who lives in a single family house on the other side of town? Probably not. But you'll have to wait and see, because it's just a different style of living. And
there's probably an expectation that when it becomes developed, that the grounds look nice, right? So right now it's amber ways of grain.
Right, but the town's actually keeping 2/3, the open space is being retained by the town.
And we're not watering.
It's really the brick building.
We love
campus.
customers.
So think of it as the brick buildings.
Yeah.
That area that will be sold. So even when we're talking about irrigation, that's the area that Trinity, that will be, their site. The green in front, the arboretum, the north field behind are all going to be retained by the town.
Yeah, it's just something to think of as they develop their proposal.
Agreed.
They're it's probably very in its very infancy now. It's just something to take. And even if it wasn't a major concern, those are the type of things development projects are taking into account wherever they're cited, just because that's become more of the standard practice. It's not. Something just for thought is where we wanted to kind of put it as something to think of.
That helpful has been conveyed. Just maybe a quick comment on Dave's question. if this project didn't go forward or didn't exist, I think the recommendation would still be to maintain the water conservation best practices in town, right? So
Yeah, the spirit of what's in this report is in our permit anyhow, so, yeah.
I think, Mo said to me a couple of years ago, like it's,
Right.
we're kind of living
And
with
we
these
have-
restrictions.
But we also
long-term
have,
regardless.
we have metrics in our permits and how things are operated here. So there's a variety of ratios that look at the efficiency of what we use, how often we use it, different sources, and making sure that it gets to its ultimate use. There are metrics on that as well.
The other thing, I just wanted to make sure the board was aware of it, and it should have been in the materials, but that we've been focused mostly on generation and demand. But the other component here is that Trinity's proposal was that this would be public infrastructure. So the roads will be public, the water and sewer under the public roads will be town-owned infrastructure. It's all publicly owned today, so that's just one piece that I wanted to make sure the board was aware of, and that's informing our long-term fiscal impact, as well as Mo's look at what his needs might be to take on that added.
So what is
infrastructure
the, so you're saying that the boundary of the ownership by the town would go up, these would be town roads?
Correct.
Right? And who would pay for the infrastructure up and down the hill?
So in terms of getting the project ready to go, the infrastructure cost to connect to our system, install everything is on the developer. And, whether they choose to go after some grant funding, that they can go right ahead. The town will not contribute to any infrastructure cost to get the project going. Once everything is complete, tied in and open, then it is town's obligation to maintain for the long term.
So with that in mind, that was why we did include a provision about an additional connection, considering an additional water system connection, since the town's retaining the arboretum for whatever future uses they might, so that if that infrastructure is put in place, you at least have a new connection point for anything the town wants to do, as opposed to having to then go 5 years from now, tear up something that's recently constructed just to extend the main. But otherwise, the general network as laid out, whether it be water and sewer, pretty consistent with what PAR's preliminary layouts look like, keeping it to the public, the roadway, limits of roadway and everything like that. You're not getting cross-country piping or gravity sewers.
So we can field questions at that meeting. I can't. I will not be here.
On the 21st.
Right. You be there?
Yeah, I think I'm fairly certain I put it on my calendar.
And I assume Eric's going to be there.
I've already tentatively put it on my calendar.
Perfect.
The other thing, I think what we've been doing is releasing some rolling frequently asked questions, or just questions, and providing answers. We would like to incorporate, obviously, a direct response on the water and sewer piece, reflecting this conversation. So I can take a stab at drafting that. I don't know if a member of the board wanted to then, if there's somebody in particular you want me to send it to.
Yeah, I'll
Okay.
review it.
Okay.
Sign it, yeah.
I will do that and send it to you this week. Thank you.
There's also a meeting Thursday night where Trinity will be, where's that, public safety building?
Yes.
Can't make
I don't
that.
know if anybody's able
Well,
to
we've
join.
been asked to be at that
Someone's
meeting. There's a warrant meeting that he's covering me on, so I think
So what's my wrong?
That was last night.
No, there's
there's a warrant committee meeting Monday,
Monday.
so
I'll
we,
do that one.
yeah, we're
Just want to make you.
whack aware.
You're talking to the people who have been at every meeting for every night for the last 6 weeks, so they get your.
This, we really appreciate being on your agenda today. Thank you for coming.
Our pleasure.
Is there a meeting tonight? Is there a meeting tonight?
I have a meeting time, my calendar.
There's a joint land use boards
Land use
meeting
boards
by
meeting, yeah.
Zoom tonight.
Yeah, tonight.
That's what I want.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then there's also another public session day with Trinity on Thursday, in person in town.
Is there an
Yeah,
ask
that's-
for representation at tonight's or Thursday's meeting?
No, just Mondays.
I think the invitation has gone around from Sarah. I'm not sure if anybody's joining, but
I'm sure if you would like to join, we could get you an invitation. That would not be an issue.
I'm not looking for an excuse, but I want to make sure that we're, you know, supporting if you need support. I think there's gonna be lots of people there, so.
And the warrant committee discussion, that's something they're interested in having this conversation. I think that will be really helpful.
Yeah, Monday's important.
Yeah, I'll do that one.
Okay.
Just send me any invitations and I'll see if they fit in my calendar if you feel I'm needed. I right now just have special town meeting on the 21st in my calendar.
did you want to hear from any of the folks that are on from VHP or Trinity? It's just,
We're good, I think. Okay.
that's great. That's
Yeah.
your goal, make sure you're.
We got some other, we got some other business.
Yeah,
And
okay.
I don't have any outstanding questions, so I appreciate folks being available to us.
Oh, again, thank you.
Appreciate you coming in.
See you
Thanks.
around.
All right, I'll say goodbye to you all unless Bill, Christian, Dave, Claire, do you need me for anything else?
No, I think we're good. We just have some other admin stuff. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Oh, and I did update the fluoride memo while you were talking earlier, so I will send that over this week.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Okay, thank you. Need to take a bio break. Yeah, okay. Thanks. Talking about water and stuff.
No,
I'm not looking at you like I'm asking you to go, but
usually I just run around, you know.
is this okay? This cover everything you want?
My husband and I had a date tonight to get together at this land use boards meeting. That's what we're gonna do. I think so.
We're just in a short recess for anyone who's on the line right now.
I think right now we should Sarah.
Okay. Well,
There's, we get, unfortunately, we also have a selectmen's meeting at the same time, so it's just been.
I did know at the, I don't remember first, it's fine, at the, I can't say it, it's a or live thing, it's fine, but I did know at the Conservation Commission meeting last week. The development on Elm Street, Colwell, he did say that he was working with us to come up with a plan, so I don't know if that's.
who?
Yeah, I mean, and he may have been meaning that he's trying to set up a meeting, but it sounded more like, to them, in my opinion, that more work process was already going on, and I thought that was just, since I was on the meeting, bring it up to the, he wants to
So
connect,
those last, I don't know, 75, 80 words. I don't.
you know,
Remember that combination.
the developer who wants to develop on Elm Street.
Scott Caldwell.
Well, I'd like to attach to our water treatment plant over
Wastewater plant.
and also to run a line up to
No,
Stevens
yeah,
Lake.
I've covered some of that stuff.
Okay.
With mode.
He made it, let me forget this, he mentioned it on the Conservation Commission asked, what is your plan for water? Because he can't probably put a septic on that pot plan. And he said, I'm working with the board to figure out a path forward. So,
I'm currently working.
So we
So I
really
just
should have
wanted
said,
to-
I know Sarah's listening, so we really should have said, is I'm trying to schedule a meeting to even
Correct.
tell them what I want to do.
correct. So I just wanted to like bring it forward.
I'll
I had
make
not
sure
heard of
Sarah
that, that we had already were.
No, and he's been trying to schedule a meeting, but I don't think we've been able to talk to him about it.
So we're just,
No, there are some regulatory policies that prevent, I think, his primary solution. So
That's
We
what
can we can talk about that.
I just thought I would,
Yeah.
it was only because it came up and you were mentioned, so I just.
yeah,
Yeah,
there's
I'll put that
there's a
on.
handful of things that when they're ready, I bring them to the meeting. Some things aren't. They're just not baked enough.
Totally. No,
I'll
I
just let Sarah know, so I put it on her radar since she's at the conservation commission meeting, that that's still in progress.
It's not sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just the way it was said, it was, I just thought.
Okay.
Say it
Super
first.
helpful. I've talked to the board, it's like, no, you asked for a meeting.
Okay, next item is a report on the revenue variance analysis. So I started this about a year ago. And it's essentially to, as a check-in, to look at our financial status before the close of the year. It looks at the collected revenue from the previous billing, which is the October billing, and then basically adds to that the commitments, which are basically the water bills. Call it commitments, you can call them accounts, account receivables. Add those together, which are approximately what we're going to get for revenue for the rest of the fiscal year. And then you add in the other fees that we have estimated. We haven't asked for an interim of what sort of fees that we've collected, whether permits and other fees that we drag in here. So I bring that in as an estimate and add those together to see what our aggregate revenues for both water and wastewater are. So, and it actually looks promising. Want me to share this with you? I said this to you.
I went through it last night,
Yeah,
so
this earlier.
I have it all memorized. It's all in
You have it
there.
all memorized. So our expected revenues are going to be in water about 3,090,000. We are expecting 2,870,000. So that is that's about 8% higher than we expected. For the sewerage services, we were anticipating 2.11 million, and it looks like it's mapping out to 2.16. So that would be at 2% above the projection. I think I think the revenue's coming in a little bit higher than we expected is good. I think, however, I think we're going to need it because the fact that we had to go to tier 4, in the last 4 or 5 weeks has meant that this is the height of our
High water use season. Yeah.
high water use season. So it's entirely possible that the next billing cycle is probably going to be tracking lower than normal because of those restrictions. So it's good that we're pacing above budget on revenue for this fiscal year. However, I think we're probably going to need that cash come next year because of where we are with tier 4. And also the best we can do, it sounds like we'll be rolling back to tier 3, which is once per week of outdoor irrigation watering. So anyhow, so I feel good about this. I don't know if anyone feels good, but this getting an interim look at our finances before everything rolls up, and because we'll get something toward the end of the year, but then when it actually comes certified by the state, it's like September or October. So that becomes, it's too late for us to really to do planning for the next fiscal period. So any questions on that?
No, I agree with you. It's good.
Numbers up here. Review year-to-date operating expenses for water. This is the one I had saved in my arch. So we are, how many months into the year? 11? We're 11?
We're fiscal year.
Yeah, so we're about close to 90% into the year. Looking at water, the water operating expenses is 82% year to date. So that tracks pretty well. I don't see too many of them that are much higher than expected, other than gasoline. That's what it is. It's we're at 200% 200% of the budget, but that makes sense since gasoline is about twice as expensive. Last year. And on the sewerage, we are at 96%. I'm not sure if any of these reflect of the expenses that Mo had to do for the wastewater plant that we authorized for the emergency side, and whether he was just going to reclassify them or not.
I think what it boiled down to is he was trying to get everything done with it, but within the budget categories if he could. But doesn't look to me like he's gonna get their own sewer. I think maybe he'll be okay on water, but
Yeah, and
contract services is already 50,000 over. Electricity's over. Some of the big budget items are already struggling, so.
yeah, no, I
But
mean,
these are trends that we've already known about. There's nothing here that's news.
yeah, I agree. Okay. Okay, they're tracking the plan. I did not get the adjustment sheets, so I'll have to track down Tracy. I haven't put up my pumping curve in a while, but I'll just set. I'll get time, I'll put that together and have the website updated. Anything else? Any new business? Any new?
I have one thing to just kick around if we're done.
Yeah.
I was one of the folks who pushed for sort of during the day meetings for us because I did a lot of coaching when my kids were a little bit younger, and it was hard for me to make evenings work. Those days are behind me. I can't teach them anything that they don't already know, and they don't really want to hear my opinion new. So you tend to usually offer sort of business hours when you send around the polls for meetings. From my perspective, it's okay to include evening options in that if it adds a degree of flexibility for other folks. In fact, in some ways, it probably makes it easier for me. My job is getting harder for me to carve out a couple hours than it used to be. So evenings in some ways might be easier for me, but I'll still do my best to accommodate either way. I just wanted to throw that out there for folks.
How's your schedule, Dave? How does it work?
Yeah, either works for me. Evenings, daytime, business hours. I figured you were trying to do during the day for Mo's availability. So that was just my thought.
Sure, it helps the folks who are regular employees here not to have to stay late. And I can appreciate that. Accommodate it where we can. But
Yeah, I mean, traditionally, our meetings were at 7 o'clock at the, up there. I went there for years, but that was with different people, different parts of their life. Yeah. So how about you?
Doesn't matter. We go to a lot of meetings. Sorry. Just like hobby, I don't know. No, it's fine. Evenings or days, fine. Mostly work is fine. As long as I know in advance, I can carve my schedule.
If I say 7 o'clock, are we all going to be on Zoom drinking red wine out of our Yeti mugs? Is that?
does Green Hill Grill have Wi-Fi?
No. All right. So when shall we meet next time? I think we need to open up our books today and at least look at the future a little bit, because when I get home and I put one of these together, it's kind of hard to like, if there are already no fly zones, then let's
Well, vacations, summer vacations.
well, yeah, I mean, in general, yeah. So my no-fly zone right now is June, the end of June. I already know that. So the first couple of weeks of July, I become open. First couple of weeks of July.
Yeah, my daughter's at camp. That was.
Does that make you more open or less
It's
open?
more, yeah, we're not going to stay, so I'll be mostly around
Okay,
for July.
how about you, Dave?
Yeah, except for the 4th, everything looks okay first half of July anyway right now.
Yeah, so far I'm pretty good for the first half of July.
Okay. How about the evening of the 6th?
Great.
7 o'clock?
For me,
Wow, look at us. Setting a meeting in advance.
Let's see if we attend, right?
All right, so 7 o'clock here. And I think,
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
How do you feel about 6 o'clock?
I like it.
okay,
That's fine, okay.
sure.
Just for those that are coming to the meeting, obviously, we're gonna come to whatever time you set, but if you do 6 and we're not waiting around for 3 hours waiting, not that we're ever waiting around, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just gets
And
everybody home a little.
Get you home an
quicker.
hour earlier. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, 6
I'm
o'clock.
not so much worried about me, it's my other people who are been
Yeah, sure.
nonstop these days.
Okay, 6 o'clock at the National Guard.
I'm done. No, the 6 was here, the 7 was not Chicago.
Okay, 6 o'clock on 6th, okay. There's, in the next meeting, I think we're gonna discuss the sewerage rules and regulations. We did the water rules and regulations. We did lean into that pretty well. The sewerage, I think we need one of the board members to sort of maybe take that over. One of the things is that we have the water regulations and the sewage regulations, and the sort of content and format of that is really not the same. By sections, rules and roles and responsibilities and everything from fees to fines and so on and so forth. For us, yeah, for the town. And there are, I think there are a couple of items there where we've made some rulings. We've had agreements in previous meetings that I think we're going to need to memorialize and talk about whether those should be integrated into the rules and regulations or not. So that'll probably take some time for someone to get their arms around. We might have to actually change the format of both of them so that table of contents sort of looks the same. So as we drop things in, it's right now, because the town staff, what they did is they did their best from taking their own practices and best practices from others, and then try to create a deliverable, and we worked to polish that up. And then when the sewerage was done, it was done by, I think, by somebody else. And so what came out of that was a different format, a different type of content. So I think we might need to freshen that look up. I think that the board signs off on this. We actually promulgate, we promulgate the rules, regulations themselves. So we actually own the document. But I think, working in concert with the town staff is what we need to do. I think we have to just look at the contents and realize what needs to go and then start to extract that and pull it back in it. Because there's also cross-referencing within the document that needs to be cleaned up. So
If that's something you want to come with, other than the new rulings that need to be added, you want to come with that crosswalk tonight, or the next meeting, would you like to have that to talk about, or would you like to talk about it and then do it after?
how about,
I'm just
How
asking,
about
I'm
I-
gonna do a crosswalk if you want before we get.
no, how about let me get them and email to you guys, and then, you just look at them And, and, since we have an associate board member, the associate board member can work on the deliverable with one of the other members. Because, well, it's a good question, Christine. Can an associate member work with another board member and not be part of the open meeting law? Because he's a non-voting member. In other words, can we create a subcommittee with an associate member and a voting member?
My initial feeling is yes, but let me just run that by Mark just to confirm. I know,
Now you're bringing up the lawyers.
I know.
Okay. You see what we're trying to do, because it's,
You might be okay. Let me,
because Dave's a rock star, right? So,
let me think about that.
yeah,
That might be okay. You just, yeah.
okay, all right, cool. So
Not my list.
I think we'll talk about that as an item. I can't see, even if we get some other crazy, some PFAS reading that's a little bit above, would have to be dramatically higher for us to be a meeting item. We haven't talked about the filtration project itself. But I don't think we have too many. I think we have the heavy stuff this meeting.
Yep.
Thanks for your efforts today.
Move to adjourn?
I would, yes. Okay, all in favor of adjourning? Aye. Meeting's adjourned.